Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Baddies Mean Business. Happy Wednesday. Today, we are joined by a very special baddie, Maria Gonzalez Blanch. Maria is a partner at Crescent Ridge, a female-led VC firm that's invested in companies such as Nostalgia Coffee, led by Taylor Fields, based here in San Diego, Needed PBC, Walla Fitness Software, and many, many more. Maria had previously worked at Bain Company and held executive roles at a multi-billion private equity firm based in the Bay Area, and also at other consumer-focused companies such as RedBull. Give you wings. Maria joined Crescent Ridge in 2020. Since then, she has invested in over 25 companies and joined the board of Kegg Technologies. For Verity Packaging, Maria also lives here in Carlsbad with her husband and two beautiful children. Welcome, Maria.
Welcome.
Hello, thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have you on. I know we've known each other for quite a while. Me and Maria met first when I was working at the Lab and Entrepreneurship Center at SDSU. I was in charge of the seed fund dinners, and Maria was one of our speakers for my senior year. And she was fantastic, and she actually sparked a lot of curiosity within venture capital for the group, which was very special for me to see, because at that time I wasn't working in venture capital, but now I am. So it's cool to see where we are now and to continue the relationship.
But yeah, it's very incredible, seeing your journey and all the things you're doing is just very inspiring in such a short time.
Absolutely. And so I would just love to hear more about you from your own words. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone out there. My name is Maria. I was born and raised in Spain. I'm an industrial engineer by training. I lived and worked in many different countries, so very international background. Work at Bain, as you mentioned before, Riley, and then I moved to the US over a decade ago. I moved to go to grad school at Stanford, and after graduation, I worked in private equity, and also as an operator in diverse roles from sales to marketing to operations. So I've done a little bit of everything and a little bit of a jack of all trades, master of none.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But I finally settled down in San Diego in 2019. That's where my husband is from. And it's always been a dream for me to live in San Diego. So we finally made our way here. And that's when I was very blessed and was so lucky to meet Alison Long, who is the founder of Crescent Ridge. And I'm so lucky to work with her today. So as soon as I met her, I could see immediately the incredible person she is. She professionally and personally, and fell in love with her investment thesis, the approach, and the strong values, and her vision of and her way of doing business. So Crescent Ridge was founded by Alison 10 years ago. It's a female-led evergreen venture fund based in Solana Beach. We're very different from what most people would think about a venture firm, and there's a lot of reasons for that. To start with, we don't have LPs. The main source of our capital comes from Alison's family, and we also have other smaller partners, including myself. So our motivations when we invest are a little bit different than most venture capital firms out there, and I can touch on that later. We're very big proponents on capital efficiency to maximize optionality. Our ideal investment is not the founder that needs a lot of rounds, start with A, B, C, D, etc. We prefer to invest in companies that eventually win off from VC, ideally either have a smaller exit of 100 million or they just become a very sustainable business over time and raise a growth round with debt or something like that. And then the last thing is that we look for founders that are values aligned and have a similar philosophy in building companies and who are very interested in using their company as a platform for making the world a better place. And we mostly invest in health, in SaaS and consumer, but we're generalists. We really care about the actual founder and who they are.
100%. And we so appreciate you providing all the context. And if you wouldn't mind, just for those who may not know, what exactly is an evergreen fund compared to other VC funds?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So an evergreen, it's a fund that is always deployed. So we recycle our capital whenever we have an exit, we reinvest it. We don't have LPs, so it's our own money. And, most funds are, you raise a fund with different LPs, and there's a team in place managing the capital, and once it's deployed they raise another fund, and etc., etc. So for us it doesn't work like that. We have this source of capital that is always there, and we have targets every year to deploy. But if it's a year that valuations are crazy and it doesn't make sense, we are a little bit more patient, and the years that we see better opportunities, we might invest a little bit more. So yeah, it's a little bit more free.
I think this is
has less constraint.
Yeah, this is like a very exciting topic to me, because we haven't yet like broken down exactly like the VC basics in this episode or this podcast yet. So just kind of give a greater glimpse is, well, the term LP, it means limited partner, and those are usually those who invest in venture capital firms. They're the ones who make us function, and so they're extremely important to the ecosystem. And then, so like for the firm I work for, we go off fund to funds. So like we raise a certain amount for one fund, say like for example 20 million. We deploy that capital over a course of like say 2 to 3 years, and then after that, raise another fund. So that's kind of like the difference between those two. But just to kind of get a better glimpse into like who you are, Maria, because we love to focus on the human side of people too. What is like something about yourself, say like a skill or activity or something that you love to do that you don't often get to share with other people, but would love to share?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, and I'm a person that I prefer to build a relationship and get to know each other before I share more things. But something funny that actually very few people know is that growing up, I wanted to be a psychologist.
Oh, nice.
I was fascinated by understanding the power of the mind. I've always been, have a very strong intuition, and I was very into meditation at a very, very early age. And I was very interested in discussing with people the purpose of life and very deep topics. And it's funny because I did something totally opposite. I became an engineer, which is exactly the opposite thing. And I don't regret it at all. It was wonderful and very good decision at the time. But the truth is that I'm very interested in understanding myself and others. And I have a very strong desire to have deep, authentic conversations with friends and family. And I wish a lot more people knew that and they open up more. And I really don't like transactional interactions very much.
100%. 100%. I'm kind of curious of like, so like when I was in my junior year of high school, I've said this before on the pod, but I wanted to become either a psychologist as well or a journalist. So those were like my two options. And I ended up studying finance instead because I thought that you could always like.
That's pragmatic, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, isn't that how it goes? But I think what's interesting is like, they're not in different boxes. Like psychology is like applicable to anything. And so it's like really cool.
Right.
Anything, and especially like venture capital, it really is. It's a very relationship driven industry, and so it's very important to like take care of each person and like have an understanding of how people think within this industry, because it's like how the way you pursue and capital or allocate your capital is like what drives like certain innovations in general. But I'm kind of curious, like, is there any like really cool books that you've read recently, since you do love learning and learning about the mind and learning about people? What's like something that's kind of inspired you recently?
I mean, recently, I'm going to be honest, I don't read too many books, as many as I want.
Yeah, no problem.
I have kids and work. And
absolutely.
I don't know hobbies, but something that I read recently is How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. I love that book. It was very interesting to see, like the science behind psychedelics and coffee and your mind. And I like that one. But yeah, I'm not a big book reader lately. I have to admit that.
100%. And that's totally fine because you are a mother. You're a hardworking mom. Yes. And so I'm kind of like curious, like how, like if you had to, is being a mother change the way that you look at investing? Like the way you look at problems has like since starting like that whole, like, I think honestly, motherhood is probably it's definitely the hardest job you could possibly have. Has your perspective on the world changed since then when it comes to like what you do for work?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I've changed so many things. First of all, I mean, it's very good for negotiation because you have to be constantly negotiating with an irrational human being that is totally a psycho. So you need a lot of patience. I mean, just for context, my kids are 1 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then it makes you focus on the important things. I don't have a lot of time in general, so you just have to prioritize. And then, in general, you get to know yourself a lot better. Like you thought you were one person, but then when you're a parent, you think, oh my God, I suck at this, or and there's a lot of like improvement every day. It's very humbling, to be honest.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Wow. Yeah, I totally agree. Just getting into like more of your career aspect as well. So in what ways like have you drawn like your creativity through like previous roles and building brands and as an advisor? Like what keeps you, like what draws in that creativity and that inspiration for you?
Yeah.
If you could provide more
So
context too on like your role at RedBull and like your experiences throughout with that team, I think it's really interesting to learn like about like branding takes a lot of like thought, creativity, and so what's your
yeah.
specific approach?
Yeah, so the truth is that I never really had a master plan. I always knew, I always did the work of understanding my values and what I want out of life, and then I tried to design my life to get there. But in terms of my work before, I've done a little bit of everything. Why? Because I'm a very curious person. So I'm not the best at getting very deep and operating and always getting focused on something. I just want to learn new things. And that's probably why I did engineering. And after that, I did consulting, and I worked with 20 companies in a matter of 3 years. And after that, I went to business school and then again into private equity because I got to work with 13 different brands. So I always like to have my hands in too many things, And in terms of building brands, I mean, I something that I'm not very good at is at design and art and all those things. I'm not great. I'm not very good at it. I'm much better when it comes to brand storytelling. I'm boiling down what is truly important. I think more in bullet points. So I prefer to use a whiteboard and post-its and do some brainstorming sessions with other people. And I like to write things down and under different themes. And that's really how I mean my process. And then I really like to ruminate and go outside of the office. And then when I'm surfing or running or doing something active, like just thinking, okay, how do we make this very complex problem simpler? So I always like to think about like the overall, like crazy, like put everything on the table and then just try to make things very simple and what is the most important thing. So that's normally my process. Yeah.
I love that.
I think
that's a really cool perspective because like when you think of branding, you do think of the design elements, but really when you boil it down, it is a storytelling role. You kind of like sparked a analogy in my head. This morning, I was listening to an interview by Jennifer Lawrence and Viola Davis, and Variety, I think, is the account, and they were talking about like in order to be like a great actor, actress, you have to become an observer of life. And so I feel like I see that within your story of like I'm starting to identify patterns within your own personal brand being a Jane of all trades. But they were very true. And like, I think the best way to understand how to boil down stories is like to be an observer of life, because that's where you can get the best education. So I'm kind of just like curious if like that plays into like your thought process when it comes to breaking down these different stories.
Yeah, totally. I think I feel identified with that. I think that, again, I'm very curious and I just like to observe, to learn new things. I mean, I feel like I'm here in the world to just keep learning every day and keep getting to know people, like how people solve different problems, what are the problems. I like to have always very different perspectives, how people in one side think and the other people on the other side. So, yeah, I think to your point, I think that the more you're exposed to more things, the better.
I totally agree. I think also just like with you being involved in so many different things throughout your career, what would be like a I guess, what do you kind of look at for like founders that inspire you or people who inspire you? Like, what are the qualities that you feel are really important when you're trying to like either get involved with something new, or when you have in the past, like, what do you feel like is the most important value in your career?
Yeah, I think that founders that I really admire, I mean, a lot of in our portfolio, to be honest, I really admire when founders are very self-aware and they are authentic. They really are. They did their work of getting to know who they are, and they also understand what are their shortcomings, and they have a growth mindset. So those are the things that I value the most. I also think that there's a very like difficult balance between you want them to be very stubborn and being very committed to their mission, but at the same time flexible enough to get feedback and understand, you know, things that they need to change. And at the end of the day, that's always the exercise of keeping your ego in check. And I think that a lot of the founders, they need to have big egos and being like a little bit on the of a narcissist to get these crazy projects done. I really admire them because I personally, I don't think I could start these businesses and have so much, you know, so much drive and you know, and passion on getting on a very long project. But you also want them to be, you know, self-aware and humble and all those things. So it's hard. I think that somebody that is balanced, at the end of the day, you want somebody that is balanced, but also relentless, that know how to sell. I mean, the selling skills are super important. When you're a founder, you need to sell to everyone, not only to investors, but your team. You need to get people on board with your vision, and that requires a lot of like selling skills.
Absolutely. I think it takes a really unique kind of person to master both of those traits, because you have to be so upfront and business mindset and like, you know, just on, but then you also need to have that balance of being a human and having human emotions and, you know, all of those things that come into that, but balance it well enough. So I feel like that's really interesting, because I don't think everybody is suited for that role, and it takes a very unique kind of person to do that. And yeah, I think those traits are really important as well. Definitely.
Yeah, I also think that what, you know, what makes a founder very good in the early stage, many times is like a problem when the company starts to grow. So I think that is also tricky, and some founders, like, you know, they recognize it and they think, okay, you know, I need another person who knows about this. But you know, so it's always like a very interesting journey to see like what happens with each company and how people adapt. And at the end of the day, it comes to having a growth mindset. I mean, can they adapt and change and are willing to change?
100%.
Totally.
I think that that's the a conversation we had is like, what does it mean to like invest like founder first? And I feel like that what you just said is exactly like what it is. It's like sometimes when it comes to so investing in like early stage companies, so like pre-seed and seed stage companies, like some firms do invest founder first, meaning it's about if you're pre-revenue, blah blah blah, you're selling yourself, like you're selling like who you are and your team and like your resilience. And so I think that's like something I've like chatted with other founders, like, okay, well, how am I supposed to like prove to these investors that I'm worth investing in if I haven't done gotten the amount of traction metrics that I need? And it's like, well, you and yourself are a value point. Like you are like somebody who has a story to tell. And so I'm like really glad that you touched on that when it comes to like how you invest in your career.
Me too.
I'm kind of curious also. So going through and like you invest in healthcare and you have your own specific investment thesis for the firm, but for you and yourself, like what types of problems have you been just really passionate about in your own personal like perspective in the world that you would just love to just talk about and like share with others and maybe point attention to?
Like problems that I'm dying to to solve for. I mean, of course, we're like a small, tiny fund and we have limited resources, but if money wasn't
like resources
resources
are plentiful in an imaginary world, like what would you do?
Yeah, if the resources were like not a problem, I would solve the health problem. I mean, physical and mental. people are like sick, and body and mind are very connected. I'm a very passionate person about health and wellness, and also about the mind in general. So I think that the system today is very good to keep you alive if you're about to die. But when it comes to something more preventive and holistic, there's not a lot of solutions, and people are more and more interested of taking ownership of their own health. And I believe that's it's a huge problem, and it's only getting bigger. But it's really hard to fix. There's a lot of interest, and FDA is tricky, reimbursement, all the healthcare system in the US. So I think it's changing, and it will change, but it will take a lot of capital and a lot of, and also the consumers shifting their mindset on what they want.
And I read that you like to maybe previously or you are very into fitness, or you've surfed before. How do you in yourself like take care of your mental health, and like how do you what types of like solutions have you seen pretty effective in the world? This is something that me and Kenzie really care about too, is like
Absolutely.
and it's
great.
developing, like you're in a remote, for those who work remote, like it's important to do things actively in your life to make sure that you keep a sense of yourself. You feel like a person, you feel like a human. Like, what are those things for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I'm actually very active. Even if I have kids, it's a very important value in our family for both my husband and I. And I'm very active. I
Yeah.
work out a lot. I mean, one thing to do is like very getting organized. So, so you get it done. I get it done very early in the morning. I either do weightlifting or surfing, depending on how the waves are. I live by the beach, and I surf pretty much 5 days out of the week,
Wow.
something like that. I take turns with my husband to to take the kids and all that, and that's very important for me, for my mental health and also for my physical health. So that's something I do. So I think that in terms of workout, try to do something that you like, because then it doesn't feel like a chore.
Yeah.
For me, surfing, but also, I mean, I don't enjoy weightlifting that much, but strength is very important, and it's actually the first thing that if you don't have time, just do weightlifting. I think, of course, diet, be outside, be with your friends. It's a combination of everything. I try to be as balanced as I can, but I also have kids, and it's hard to do everything, right?
100%. I tried surfing for the first time this last summer, and it was probably the most humbling experience, I would say. Like the amount of cardio involved. Like I'm paddling, but I haven't moved. Like it is cool.
Yeah.
It's quite intense. And so for the fact that you make time to do that and be a mother and through your career, it's extremely impressive. I give kudos to those who surf consistently.
Absolutely. And I think just the overall message of finding things in your day-to-day that allow you to be active and go into your physical wellness and your mental wellness is just really important, especially I feel like in the early stages, when, at least for Riley and I, getting into the early stages of our career, establishing the fact that this is a need and this is a important, we need to add that into our routines, is something I feel like a lot of people might not really understand to do so, because they're like, we're young, we got this, this is the time to hustle, when you at the same time still need to be preventative with your physical and mental wellness. You need to take care
of your health.
You
now,
do, exactly.
Even if you're in your 20s. Yeah, and that was one of the mistakes I made, to be honest. I felt horrible when I was in my 20s, and now I think back, and I was working at Bain in Brazil, in this office that it was always hustling, and I remember I put 1 week that was over 90 hours of work, and I was overweight, and I mean, not super overweight, but I wasn't looking good. I wasn't healthy. I felt terrible, and and then I had a lot of health problems later on, that I think that it was because of that time in my life. But I think the time to do it is now, to be honest. But the most important thing, I think, is as long as you have it in your routine, then you don't think about it and it's on autopilot. Yeah. I think that's really the trick, having a routine.
I agree.
Totally.
That's something
and having something that is feasible, because I think like I try not, I'm never on a diet. I always like try to make the same foods that I know are good. I try to eat quite a bit of protein, and yeah, I mean, as long as it has to be sustainable. Otherwise, it's not going to stick, and it's going to be worse. So you just, as long as you can like put it in your routine, and it works.
It's true.
Absolutely.
It's really true.
Mm-hmm.
I try.
And something that you enjoy. You know,
Yeah.
if you enjoy dancing, go dance with your friends, or if you go, you know, like just do something.
Yeah.
I know. My thing for me is yoga. Like I got into my yoga journey in high school. Actually, I was fortunate enough to like one of my classes in high school. It was yoga. They like were offering it as one of the like the physical education classes, and I was like, I'm doing that. I'd love to just do yoga. And at the time, I didn't really understand fully the value of it, and then it like made me appreciate it after I graduated high school. And then I like went to a yoga studio and started doing that, and then it really became like more of a like mindful spiritual journey as well as like a physical journey. And so that's my one thing that I'm like, I'll never not be down to do yoga. Or even if I get off the path for a little bit and I don't do it consistently for like an extended amount of time, I always end up defaulting back to it when I get back into those routines, because things happen, life goes. But that's my one thing, like yours is surfing, is like that's my holy grail when it comes to like getting me back on track and getting me motivated in that way. And so I think having that one thing, whether it be like physical, whether it be just like, you like to go for walks every single day after your long day and listen to music or a podcast, or just like sit in silence of, taking in nature. I feel like having something to, like you said, implement in your routine is really, really important. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tools now, like talking about startups, there's a lot of tools that you have out there if you're somebody that like to see data. Like I love my Aura ring. I love
I've heard
like
about
calling.
those, and I actually I've heard they're amazing. So if you recommend, I might have to look more into them.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, we have also like a lot of investments in different health and wellness companies. Like Kegg, for example, is I'm actually on the board, and they are like an amazing company. It's like if you want to understand why you have irregular cycles, they have the only technology available to understand like what is happening in your cycle. Are you ovulating or not? Like, are you healthy? So that's already incredible. Like to understand like as a woman, we have not a lot of information out there, and we don't even understand our hormones or anything. So yeah, I think there's a lot of tools out there that are really cool. Like even like the glucose monitors as well. If you're like very nerdy and you like to experiment with a lot of those things, I think it's a lot, a lot of data that is available now.
Yeah.
Sure. I feel like it's really exciting to see like what's coming out in the fitness industry. Something we focus on at BGV is the gamification of fitness. So one of our portfolio companies is called Averon. And it's imagine like Peloton, but for rowing. And so, but yeah, and it's so fun to look at. And rowing is like one of those things that's like, it engages all muscles like within your body. And so it's like something you don't think of, like instantly you think when I want to do something like for fitness, like I go weightlifting, I go running, but I'm like, there's actually a lot of options like coming out, like brand new ones each and every day. ClassPass. So like being able to like go to like groups of classes, like I used to do F45 with my cousin for a little bit. It was it was quite intense, so I will say like it got a little not so enjoyable, but for me, like I'm more of like a weightlifter, and then I like to play volleyball. So it's like there's so many options. So for people who like, especially young people, when you may not be as busy or you're extremely busy, you'll get to a point in your life when you're in your career or and you have a family that like those things, like if you establish it early on, will be helpful to have that habit, rather than like getting to a point in your life where you kind of like don't engage in anything that just keeps your mind right and your body right. So it's cool to start early and kind of just like explore and be adventurous with it all.
Totally. I agree.
Yes, totally.
I'm kind of curious too. So, being like from a female-led firm, I think it's like something that's not as frequent and not as common as in the industry as like some people may want it. I agree with that. What kind of advice, like from your career, that you learned about yourself, or what's something you learned about yourself that could be helpful for other women who would want to join the venture or like work in venture capital one day?
That's a very good question. The truth is that I was extremely lucky to find my way as an investor. It's something I love. I found my calling, and I was really, really lucky. And there isn't a clear path. But I would say there's a couple practical things you can do. I mean, on the one hand, you can just do your internal homework and understand what you want out of life. What are your values inside and outside of work, and what you're good at. And second, find good people to work with who are kind and deeply care about you and who share your values. And the only way to find that is just go and meet a lot of people and talk to as many people as possible and build relationships. Um, so yeah, and there's some people that say, okay, great, I don't even know what I want to do, which that happened to me many times in life. I just, I wasn't sure. So I think that's okay. Just go and try things, and you will eventually find your way to something you love. And it can take a lifetime. It can take a long time until you really find what you really love and what you're good at. So yeah, I would say just go for it.
I love it.
100%.
And something that I would say, on the other hand, is that I think venture is not for everyone. I think it can be deceptive from the outside, and it's not easy to make money, especially if you are not on the big funds. And it's also a lonely job compared to an operational role in a company. So I would say that the most you talk to people in venture, the better, to understand really what it takes. And if your personality is made for it, because a lot of people are just disenchanted after they work in venture.
It's so true. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it's something that, for one, what you mentioned before, if like, I think the first step, just like finding that first step of wanting to join an industry in general, is to just like understand yourself and to have a perspective. Especially with venture capital, like having a perspective on how you see the future is like one of the greatest ways, and being able to share that with other people is like a great way to start. But like what you said is like, yeah, I think venture capital definitely has like a lot of like a lot of people want to join the industry. But I think the most important thing you do is like, every person has a different experience, and every person gets into venture capital in a different way. And so just like having exposure to that is like, it's a great thing to do for yourself, because for one, it's for doing just in search for a career that you love to do in the long term. Definitely acknowledge that like there's going to be like downsides, upsides. Like it's not always going to be upside. I think venture capital is, for me personally, like I love it. But I know there's other people who may not like resonate with it as deeply as some others. So
Yeah, and I think that goes for everything too. I mean, I think everybody is fit for their own specific roles and their own like callings, and that's why like trying a bunch of things out and exploring all the options. Because I feel like when I was, a senior in high school, for example, like trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? Everybody seems to have everything figured out when they're in college. Like this is the time to figure it out. And I put so much pressure on myself to like know what I wanted to do. And so I remember like the time that I figured out like, oh, I want to go into digital marketing. I was literally just sitting in my, like, I can't remember where I was at. I think I was in my previous home. And I was like, okay, what are the things that are like, that I value? Like, what do I enjoy? And I kept defaulting back to like all the things that my previous chapter was high school. So I was like, what did I enjoy doing? I loved being creative. I was very artistic. I love photography. I love designing. I love doing things like virtually. So what can I do in a career like that? And so I like researched programs and like digital marketing. I thought marketing was like, you couldn't do that really over social media. And I thought if you could, it was a very like particular kind of job. It wasn't something that everybody could do, and that it was just really like up to the marketing firm or like whatever like company it was, and them figuring it out in their like mix. So I was like, oh, it's not its own thing, it's just added on. And then I found out it wasn't, and I was like, okay, well, I have to just like run with the thing that I know best and see where it goes. And that's what I did. And I think I was just glad that I had that like aha moment of like, you knew this all along, that this is what you enjoyed. Why didn't you just run with it? And so I think like my advice for that also ties into yours of just like trying things out and like figuring out what your values are, what your morals are, what you really like enjoy doing, and then seeing where it evolves. Because there's so many things out there that like I didn't even know what venture capital was or like investing was, other than people working at like finance firms and like
Or
they
Shark
invest
Tank.
or like
Yeah.
Shark. Yeah. I was like, I don't know anything about this. And now like being able to absorb it from Riley is just so cool. And so I'm learning all of these different areas, different industries, and there's so much out there other than, you know, the standard, you know, medical, like just general marketing or business or owning a business. And there's so much. So I think that's also something to remember if people like get really intimidated. It's just knowing that like, okay, just because you go with something doesn't mean that that's going to be your end all be all. Like it might lead you to a path that you didn't even know existed. And so that's something that I like super resonate
Totally.
with.
And it can take decades. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
And what I love about Kenzie's story too is like back in high school, in my opinion, I don't think social media was taken seriously as a career. Like it was just like, you can't have a career in like social media and Instagram. Like you can't do that. Of course, like the next 5 years after that proved that terribly wrong. But like Kenzie was like knew that from the beginning. Like she's always been that girl. Like that she knew that she could make something special out of it. And so I think that there's a lesson in that. It's like there's going to be things that like people may not like understand like how the opportunity, but as long as you can see the vision and you can see yourself doing it, I feel like that's the most important thing. And the resources for that are available somewhere. You'll find it somewhere.
Absolutely.
But
and you can always change, you know, you make a mistake or I mean, it's never going to be a mistake because you're always going to learn and have a new perspective from being in an industry. But you're not always caged to something just because you chose to be an engineer or be a, you know, in finance if you don't like finance, right? I mean, you can always change. Life is so long.
But it's really, it is true though. Like you don't have to like feel like you have to do one thing for the next 50 years if you love what you do and that you want to do it, but you don't have to. Like I think that's something that's definitely a lot more prominent these days. It's like side hustles and job, like having different lifetime. I always like to think of it like I tell my mom, I'm like, I want to live 5 different lives in my lifetime. Like 5 different stories, 5 different books to tell. You never know. But Kenz, do you want to kick us off with the last question?
Yeah, absolutely. So since we're approaching the end of the year, we've been asking our guests this month, what is one personal and professional goal that you have for the upcoming year?
Yeah. A personal goal, I mean, I have a bunch of self-care related goals as a mom. I always look forward to those. So I started doing jiu-jitsu and I love it.
Wow.
I want to get more competent at it and you know, keep like getting more in shape and sleep more, stay off the phone in the weekends and be more present with my kids. And then professional, I would say, we have seen over the years that founders that do the right thing and run their business with a lot of integrity and purpose do also better financially over time. We're actually being blessed with very good returns. And as investors, we see wealth and the money we're investing as multidimensional. So internally, we have a framework called 4-dimensional wealth, which is we don't only want to make money, but we want to create better relationships, you know, create more innovative things and create social impact. So we call that those 4 dimensions, financial, relational, intellectual, and social. And what we're doing this year that we're very excited about is we're starting to gather more data about those things that are not only financial, but the other dimensions. And we create a survey and we're starting to deploy it with all our companies. And we want to gather more data and start to demonstrate that the founders that care about these other things do actually better over time. And we're also doing like some playbooks and case studies about our portfolio companies. So this is something that we're very excited about and very passionate about. And that's a goal we have for 2023.
That's so exciting.
Exciting.
I read a little bit about your 4-dimensional wealth. I thought that philosophy was brilliant. I'm kind of curious, like with your data collection process, like what are some kind of questions that you want to answer from these surveys?
Yeah, so in these 4 dimensions, I mean, they all, of course, financial is very straightforward and it's all the questions that you would imagine in a venture capital firm. But on the, for example, the relational side, there's different questions around like that they have to be quantified, right? So we quantify a lot of them with where is the churn of your customers, like NPS and things like that are more typical. But there's also like a lot of questions that are, how often do you prioritize a relationship with your customer over a financial transaction? And then it would be like always, sometimes, never type of scale in a 0 to 5 scale. So we have a lot of those questions. And there's in total like 100 questions, and there's a lot of like different, it's taken us a lot of like iterations, and we're still improving it with some portfolio companies, but yeah, that's like the first step into quantifying these things a little bit better. And we're working with an external company as well, because we're not experts on this, let's be honest.
Absolutely.
So yeah, no, but this is something that we're very passionate about, and that we know it's the right thing, because we've been blessed again with very good returns, and we've seen that the founders that do well also do better financially, and we would like more investors to invest this way, and that's why we're gathering the data, because it's not enough with just saying, hey, invest in good people and you will make more money. It's actually, we want to gather the data and show it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Way to end on a good note. I love it. That's
so
awesome.
exciting.
And starting the year strong. That's super great.
Yeah, I'd love to jam with you more on that, about that offline. I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think that's really fun to just like get to know like your founders more, and like how's everything going, and like how can we be helpful.
All right, so to kind of wrap it up, we want to let our listeners know where they can connect with you. So either social platforms, if you want to connect them to your company, any projects you're working on, anything that you recommend, maybe podcasts, books. I know you said you're not a huge book reader, but anything that you think would bring value to them that you really feel that's like connected to you and your journey. So, and we'll leave them in the comments below after you share them here as well.
Yeah, so I'm not huge in social media. I'm gonna tell you the truth. Something generational. Fine. I have Instagram, but it's not that I use it that much. But LinkedIn, our website.
Perfect.
Just send me an email, I would say.
Yeah.
I'm not huge on social media, unfortunately.
No problem.
That's something I could have as a goal
for next year. If you guys are interested in learning more about their philosophy around 4-dimensional wealth, definitely check out their website. We'll go ahead and link that in the description below. But thank you so much, Maria, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. You two are wonderful, and I'm so happy to be here. So thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thank you so much, Maria.